Hi guys, this is going to be an in-depth overview of important Elden Ring issues. I hope someone from either Bandai Namco or FROMSOFTWARE takes notice of this, as I truly want the best for Elden Ring. Most of you probably already know Elden Ring has been a massive success. I'm sure you guys all heard about the crazy sales figures floating around. I think it sold something like 13 million copies in the first month instead of 4 million that they were expecting. Even just recently, IGN was talking about how Elden Ring surpassed Call of Duty Vanguard for its year sales in just over 2 months. While I'm very happy Elden Ring is this popular, as I certainly got to benefit from this myself with the recent channel growth, as much as I'm sure FromSoftware and all its partners are very happy and probably satisfied with Elden Ring's success, we're currently at a turning point that could very well decide if Elden Ring continue its run to perform successfully or start its decline. See, Elden Ring has a lot of problems that are starting to hurt the game very badly, and I'm talking about multiplayer problems. Here's the thing, Elden Ring is first and foremost a single player game. I think that much is obvious, and I think most people grasp that. But there's no denying that there's also a very strong multiplayer component. Right now, this isn't hurting FromSoftware and its partners too much, as the game is such a massive success worldwide that it's hard for them to foresee any potential future issues. With that being said, Elden Ring has a lot of very bad problems that are going to hurt the game pretty badly in the long term. Just to make sure everyone understands where I'm going with this, I'm talking about the multiplayer aspect of the game, you know, what keeps game like this relevant and active over the long term. If you don't believe me, let me share with you some hard facts. Dark Souls 3 sold about 3 million copies in the first month of release. Sekiro Shadow Dies Twice sold over 2 million copies in only 10 days, which is impressive for a single player game. So if you consider the time span, Sekiro sold more copy in a shorter amount of time than Dark Souls 3. But despite Sekiro's massive early success, it ended up selling over 5 million copies by 2020, while unsurprisingly getting outsold by Dark Souls 3 over the long term, which sold over twice as much, 10 million copies by 2020. I would also note that Dark Souls 2 sold significantly less than Dark Souls 3, despite being on the shelf for much longer. Now, anyone can theory craft as much as they want to justify why Dark Souls 3 outsold Sekiro by a large margin, despite Sekiro benefiting from the success of Dark Souls 3 and the growing brand name FromSoftware. But I mean, the obvious reason why Dark Souls 3 is more popular on YouTube, Twitch, and has garnered more sales than Sekiro is because Dark Souls 3 was a game with longevity and a strong multiplayer component. Whether people realize it or not, co-op and PvP is what drove Dark Souls 3 to be successful over the long term, while Sekiro is only a single player experience. Now that you understand the importance of multiplayer, at least I hope so, we can now stop and think about what we could do to improve Elden Ring for years to come so that it can have the most success possible, and so that we can all enjoy Elden Ring for not just a few months but for a very long time. As someone who managed to play Dark Souls 3 for over 6 years, I can assure you that Elden Ring could pull off the same feat, but better. And here's where we get into the problems Elden Ring is facing. Elden Ring has some serious issues, serious potential long-term issues. In fact, it has the most potential out of any Souls games ever made. It has all the mechanics and gameplay loop in place to be satisfying for years. But Elden Ring is plagued with game-breaking issues and poor design decisions that, while easy to fix, could be what caused the game to die quickly or to last a decade. So let's get to the meat and bones. What are these issues? It's funny because most people watching this channel are a lot more knowledgeable on average than, you know, your typical player. So a lot of what I'm about to say here will be things you guys probably have noticed already as well. So where do we start? Let's start with the obvious and the easiest thing to fix. Your favorite, my favorite, Bloodhound Step. Now this vid won't be about Bloodhound Step though, because I think we all know how stupid and broken it is. All I'm going to be saying here is that the PvP for Elden Ring would get significantly better if Bloodhound Step was not in the game. In fact, it's even baffling that it even made it into the final game, which makes me question how much these devs actually understand their own game. It completely goes against the fundamental gameplay design of these games, which is to reward the player for their timing and spacing. For those of you who don't know what that means, it's basically the ability to dodge and to counter at the right time, as well as to manage distance. In short, Bloodhound Step throws all these fundamental game design concepts out of the window by giving the player an ability that is not only faster than sprinting for laughably low stamina and FP cost, but also grants near perfect complete invulnerability. So the closest thing that has ever existed in any Souls games as a reference point to Bloodhound Step is actually a function and cheat engine that hackers used to use in Dark Souls 3. So yeah, closest thing we ever got to Bloodhound Step was basically immortality through cheat engine. Alright, now that Bloodhound Step is out of the way, let's get to other AAA crippling issues that Elden Ring is facing. So the activity level. How many times do you see people asking how active X level is? It's because despite Elden Ring being only 2 months old, we're already seeing a ton of dead areas, and that's also despite how much it sold. Like, it sold like crazy. You can still find activity in hotspots like the lake or first step at nearly every level, but on the other hand, you'll struggle to find activity at 90% of Site of Grace on the map if you're not like at a very specific level to match the organic progression of said area. Basically, we're seeing an issue where the map is so big that the activity is diluted everywhere, and that's not only true for PvP and invasions but also co-op. A fix for this would be for the matchmaking structure to kind of merge invadable areas by zone. For instance, invading in Limgrave would invade in every Site of Grace instead of just, you know, the specific Site of Grace. Invading in Ferro Missoula would attempt an invasion at every Site of Grace you've discovered in Ferro Missoula. Right now, if you invade at Ferro Missoula, the game only searches for invasions at the specific Site of Grace at which you're located. This is not enough for a game of this size. I would also invite FromSoftware to take a look at a Dark Souls 3 mod like Wex Dust as a reference. For co-op, while making some new characters, I've progressed through the game organically, and I've noticed that after Limgrave, it's actually hard to find someone to co-op with, and I mean not someone with a password, but someone to be publicly matchmaked with. The system that is currently in place that is used to send signs like throughout the world doesn't seem to be working as well as it should. Basically, you need to be over leveling to see more signs. Usually the point of progressing through an area though is to be able to beat the next boss to gather enough runes to level up. So it's kind of backward here. You need to be over level for the area to see more co-op signs, which is a real shame as this reduces the amount of multiplayer interaction altogether, and this hurt both co-op and PvP significantly. There's also a simple way to fix this, and this ties to another major problem Elden Ring PvP is facing, and it's the scaling of phantoms. How many times have you invaded a host at level 10 or, I mean, Ultra out 90 or sky's the limit, just to get one-shot by level 500 Phantom with Rivers of Blood that bleeds you and kills you in a single L2. I mean, the reason this happened is because password summons in Elden Ring are not scaled down properly, or at least as well as they should. There definitely needs to be a significant improvement in the scaling of Phantoms with the proper scaling and matchmaking for co-op signs. It needs to be more generous for summoning Phantoms that are higher level than the host without a password. So basically, the scaling needs to be improved so that it does its job properly, and it also needs to be broader so that it gets more players to play with each other without making co-op and PvP unbalanced for the lower level players. To go into the specifics of what needs to change, for higher level Phantom and getting summoned by lower level hosts, the arcane stats needs to be scaled down closely to match the host level. Next, there needs to be a penalty for damage taking, given how higher level Phantoms can wear heavier gear, stronger armor, which is not really the case at the moment. Phantoms only get soft HP penalty, which is not nearly enough. There should also be a stronger nerf to damage to account for the fact that higher level Phantoms have much better weapon, much better stats across the board for the weapon to scale better. And finally, the Estus for Phantoms, and that's also true for invaders, should be adjusted according to what the host has. So an invader who invades a low level host and the invader has 6 fully upgraded flasks while the host only has 4 unupgraded flasks, like that needs to be adjusted. On PC, there's a lot of disconnects happening during multiplayer, and it's hard for me to formulate a fix for this, as this issue is definitely crippling for the PC activity and should be addressed as soon as possible. Unfortunately though, that's probably one of the hardest things to fix, you know, as they probably would have done so already. Another thing that would take some effort to fix but is also very important are the input drops. Elden Ring has some specific bugs, like under specific conditions, after specific movement, the game will eat your input. This is an issue we've never really seen in other Souls games before, at least never to this extent, which is unfortunate given how Elden Ring doesn't feel as responsive as its predecessors. There are also numerous bugs and glitches still around that needs to be addressed, namely the absolutely game-breaking helmet swap glitch. Basically, you can get all your HP back by simply equipping and re-equipping 2 specific helmets a few times. I mean, this completely breaks the game, and I would dare to think this is going to be fixed as soon as FromSoftware is made aware of it. On another note, there's another type of issue plaguing the game that no one really is talking about. It has to do with rewarding people to dupe while penalizing people who do not dupe, and let me explain. In Elden Ring, you gather a bunch of material around the map to craft various consumables. Some of these are very scarce, and I mean, it's fine. Obviously, we don't want the strongest consumables to be widely available at all levels for the PvE. But here's an issue though. You can't gather a lot of these consumables during even a full playthrough. Like, you can get an infinite amount of these consumables dropped by another player, and they can just reload their save and get the item back. This is how the rune selling shitty sites work, by the way. But I'm not making an argument against duping though. It's obviously some sort of form of exploit. I'll be the first to admit that I've duped a lot, especially in Dark Souls 3, to make more builds more quickly, and there's no doubt that duping is a massive time saver, and I mean, we don't have time to farm all day, which is precisely the issue in Elden Ring. No one has time to farm all day. When the game gives you access to such a low amount of these consumables, let me give you a concrete example. Strings. In Elden Ring, you can farm strings from dummy human. You can find a few strings around the world. Strings are used to craft rope bombs and buff bundles. Both of these consumables are one-time use, and they're not even that strong either. In a single PvP fight, you can easily go through 10 rope bombs and 20 bundles, which is about, you know, the amount of strings you would gather in a full playthrough. You could easily go through 20 bundles in a single boss fight, which makes these consumables kind of unusable for anyone who's playing the game normally, as they're not even strong enough to warrant using once on occasion. Basically, anyone that wants to use these bundles on their build needs to dupe them in order to gather enough of them for it to last for at least a few fights. Otherwise, you cannot gather enough material by playing the game normally and effectively use them. While we don't mind duping, we definitely don't want to force players to have to dupe in order to have access to basic consumables that were also widely used and widely available in previous games. I think a simple fix for this would be to have all crafting materials sold by merchants around the world, so that things like strings are not impossible to get in large quantities. Also, while we are on the topic of consumables, there's a very broken consumable out there that also benefits people who dupes and breaks the balance of the game. Yes, I'm talking about the Starlight Shards. Starlight Shards basically give you a ridiculous amount of FP over time, and I mean, it sounds fine at first, but with how Elden Ring is, and because it's so easy to spam L2 and kill everything by just spamming over and over like some Ash of War, the fact that you can have 10 Starlight Shards readily available at all time defeats the whole purpose of investing into the mind stat or even carrying an FP flask. A fix for this would be to limit how many Starlight Shards a player can carry at a time. Honestly, 1 or 2 would be plenty. Right now you can carry 10 and it's a bit insane. Okay, so moving on. Next big Elden Ring issue, the damage. Why is the damage so stupidly high in this game? You can make nearly anything two-shot players in PvP under the right build. It makes PvP fights so short, you'd think it's mandatory to have 60 vigor. Joking aside, too many things do too much damage in Elden Ring. There's a lot of ways this could be addressed. The damage for every attack or Ash of War could be adjusted manually, but this would represent a pretty hefty task, and I'm not sure this could be done perfectly without like forgetting about some crazy attack here and there. So I don't think this is a realistic solution. One of my personal opinion on this would be to give players access, or give every player access to their Great Rune, and that's in PvP and co-op. Since we lost the ability to pick a covenant in multiplayer, there's not really a mechanic that replaces that feature. Great Runes are only good for the host, which is unfortunate given how some builds could benefit greatly from either the versatility that some of these Great Rune offers, like for instance God with Great Rune would benefit hybrid builds, you know, giving 5 stats and everything, while the Radon runes would give a massive HP increase, which would help mitigate the damage problem. I think for the Radon rune you get 3k HP instead of 2k. Having 3000 HP instead of 2000 would definitely go a long way to make fights last longer so that people don't get 1 or 2 shots. Also related to the Great Runes, currently the game makes it very difficult for people to have a fair duel. What do I mean by that? There are a number of unnecessary barriers that don't necessarily prevent people from dueling, but it does make it a lot harder for both to play and enjoy. The fact that you have to activate the fur calling finger remedy to see online signs is already unintuitive on its own, and I don't think was a very good decision. To top this off, duelists have a harder time creating fight clubs, as a host can only summon 2 red phantoms in the world at a time, as well as 1 white phantom. In practice, this makes hosting fight clubs unappealing, as there's no rotation of players waiting on the side to take the spot of the next defeated player. It forces people to wait a lot longer, and to wait while they're getting summoned and while they're in the fight club. We definitely went like 2 steps back from 5 red player limit that was in Dark Souls 3 in that regard. And this is not even the only problem for duelists. While fight clubs are definitely less appealing, fighting random players by putting your sign down at, say, Academy Gate often results in unfair fight, where the host has its Great Rune active while the summoning red cannot. So we have to keep in mind that the whole point of dueling has always been to get somewhat of a fair fight. Here the game goes out of its way to include a way for the host to have an unnecessary advantage, which goes against the point of the spirit of dueling itself, and it's very unfortunate. Again, my solution for this would be to give everyone their great rune so that there wouldn't be any situation where the host would be the only one to have it. But I don't see how the fight clubs could be improved without some technical changes that increases the player limit. Perhaps the DLC area with an arena can take notes on this feature and perhaps include something similar to fight clubs built into the game, perhaps. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see, I guess. There's also a lot of balancing that could be done for the game overall, but that is usually hard to convey to casuals as they usually don't really understand the game well. They don't really have a deep understanding of the game mechanics, so the reasoning doesn't make sense to them, and that's only until they get good enough that they will understand really what's going on. Although most of the people watching here are more PvP savvy than your average player, so you're probably curious to hear what kind of balance change I would suggest to FromSoftware, and I'm going to throw a few specifics out there that I would tweak to make the game more balanced. Alright, so let's start with the first. Remove Bloodhound Step iframes on the upper body, so that means the lower body still gets to keep its iframes to traverse through you know, swamps and all of that. I would also slightly reduce the distance at which Bloodhound Step travels and slightly increase the stamina and FP cost, but the most important thing is definitely to remove the iframes for the upper body. I would reduce the range of Stars of Ruin. I think it would still keep Stars of Ruin fairly good, while it would make it a lot more manageable for both invasions and duels. Another one, delay Storm Stomp Eye Armor so that it cannot be used to reaction trade. Okay, next, normalize and reduce poise values for armors. This might seem a bit controversial, but I still think most people would agree with this. Basically, lower the amount of maximum poise to make more attacks stun anything and everyone. For instance, it should not be possible to poise a two-handed greatsword, let alone a two-handed greatsword R2. On the other hand, weapons like Rapier completely destroy anyone under 41 poise, so I think something like 41 poise should be closer to a baseline that most armors should give players, and this would be to promote more armor variety so that people can express themselves by wearing the fashion they want without completely empowering their build. So basically, poise armor values should be higher and the heavier armor poise values should be a bit lower. I would also go further as far as the poise goes. As Scott suggested in a recent vid a few weeks ago, I would increase the poise damage done by two-handed weapon across the board. This would make it worth two-handing your weapon, because right now power stancing is basically nearly double damage and more poise damage, which is like superior in every way. So instead of nerfing power stance weapon, I would advocate for a buff to two-handed weapon and a form of increased poise damage. Continuing with a list of various balance improvement, make kicks a guaranteed one-shot guard break against any shields. Kicks need this because kicks are now useless. Kicks could definitely use a massive increase in poise damage on top of that to make kicks maybe even a sure stun, kind of like Dark Souls 1. Also, make more Ash of War do increased stamina damage so that Royal Knight Resolve is not the only option for breaking guards. Also, reduce the damage of Royal Knight Resolve and Determination by a good 25 to 30%. And make Determination also do more stamina damage than Royal Knight Resolve so that both Ash of War have a distinctive use instead of one being simply a better version of the other. Make two-handed Colossal Poke parryable. Reduce status effect buildup across the board by a good 10 to 20%. And that's Bleed, that's Madness, that's Sleep, that's Frost, that's every status. Reduce the bleed buildup from Seppuku by 50%. Increase stamina damage taken from guarding while shield poking. Shield poking is still ridiculously broken and needs to be addressed. It's pretty much superior to most things in the game. There are other numerous balance tweaks and fixes that I would suggest. Those are only some of them, the most important ones I believe. Now that you got a glimpse of how Elden Ring could be improved, getting this feedback noticed is the most important step for some of these fixes to become a reality. So send this vid to Bandai Namco, email it to them, send it to them on Twitter, let them hear a piece of what is going on with the PvP. Alright guys, thank you all for watching and take care.